Hello, my name is Erin Scholl, and the article that I chose for my project is Factors Influencing Hearing Aid Use in the Classroom, a Pilot Study, done by the researchers Gustafson, Davis, Hornsby, and Bess. So a little background on this article and the research that was done prior to this study. It's based on the idea that audiologists recommend that everyone with hearing loss, especially developing children and adolescents, wear their hearing aids during all waking hours. So anytime they are awake, they are to be wearing their hearing aids as to make sure they are getting the benefit from them. And so based on this recommendation, the researchers wanted to understand reasons why children might not wear their hearing aids, what's keeping them from wearing them during all waking hours as their audiologist suggests. And so it's important to note that there's very limited knowledge of this topic. The main research study that has been done based on this topic is only on children who were younger than 7. And so school-age children have very little research done on them. So this was a big reason that propelled this pilot study forward. So a study that had been previously done was conducted with 272 children with hearing loss aged 6 months to 7 years. So just a little bit into school age, but not most of those children are not school age children. And this study used parent records and data logging to track hearing aid usage. And the results of that study were that children who were older, who had more severe hearing loss, and whose mothers had completed college reported more hours of wearing their hearing aid, as opposed to children who had milder loss, were younger, and whose mothers did not attend college. So these were the main factors that they saw in their study that affected hearing aid usage from children who were 6 months to 7 years old in their study. So older, more severe hearing loss, and whose mothers had completed college were more likely to wear their hearing aids. And in this study, older means are around 5 to 7, which is on the younger end of the pilot study that I'll be talking about in a minute. And as a result of this and some other literature that the researchers read, they kind of came up with 3 suspected reasons that children might not wear their hearing aid. So the first was a lack of perceived benefit to the person wearing it. The rate of malfunction for hearing aids in school-age children is between 27 and 60%. So that means that a lot of children's hearing aids are not working properly, and if it's causing them pain or they're feeling frustrated with it, they are not likely to wear it as often as someone who's working well. So this lack of perceived benefit to them, like how is it helping me, especially if it's malfunctioning, might be a reason why they're not wearing hearing aids. A changing educational environment. This is particularly influential for students who are entering middle school, as older students tend to have more changing environments, shifting between teachers and classrooms, where younger students are more likely to stay in one spot. So this might be a reason that their teachers aren't adjusting well, or the movement is just too much, or that environment change might be a reason. As well as peer pressure and cosmetic appearance. This is particularly noteworthy for older students, which is why this study was so influential and important, because there's not a lot of research for older students. But as the students get older, they have a bigger pressure to fit in with peers, especially quote-unquote normal peers who do not have hearing loss. And part of the reason that this was established as a potential factor is low levels of self-esteem have been shown reduced rate of wearing prescription glasses, and so researchers felt that this might be a similar correlation. So this background information is kind of the first step to understanding factors that place children at risk for not wearing hearing aids, which goes into our question, what factors influence hearing aid use in school-age children with hearing loss? So they're trying to figure out what is causing children to not wear their hearing aids and what puts them at risk to not do so. So the overarching question is what factors influence hearing aid usage? Is it that they're changing environments? Is it that they feel peer pressure? And this study is looking particularly at what puts you at risk to be vulnerable to those factors. And so their hypothesis was that the degree of hearing loss and grade level are the most influential factors for children with hearing loss not wearing their hearing aids in an educational setting. And so in order to understand this, the study was done, so to understand the participants a little bit better, these children were recruited from Vanderbilt's Pediatric Audiology Clinic and School System in Tennessee, which is like central Tennessee is where Vanderbilt is. And a lot of these students were part of a greater ongoing study on listening effort and fatigue in school-age children with hearing loss. So the children who were particularly recruited for this study had mild to moderate hearing loss, and their parents were also part of this. It was a two-part study, so their parents were also part of the participant group. The group, particularly that this study used, had 20 girls and 18 boys who were between age 6.5 and about 13 years. And so this is notable because the previous study that I mentioned in the background slide, that group was only between 6 months and 7 years old. So this study very narrowly overlaps, and that's important that most of this information is quite new. Other things to note, children with cochlear implants and children with unilateral hearing loss were not included in this study, so it only included bilateral hearing loss, so students who had bilateral hearing aids, and students were not compensated for their time in part of this study. In part of the greater study, some students were. And all of the students who were involved spent at least 2 hours per day in a general education classroom. And in order to better define what mild and moderate hearing loss were, the parameters used were defined as mild was students with a pure tone average between 20 and 40 dBHL, and students who had moderate hearing loss were defined with a pure tone average between 45 and 70 dBHL in the better ear. And so this graph right here shows the average thresholds for left and right ears of children included in the data set, and so you can just have a more visual representation of the degree of hearing loss as an average with the students. So how this was specifically done was a two-part process. So the first part was parent observation. So when the children were taken in, the parents were asked to estimate the amount of hours that their child spends wearing their hearing aid per day. And it is important to note that the parents were not informed that their child's hearing aid use and non-use would be documented, as to keep the answers as candid and honest as possible from the parents. The second part was that the children were actually being observed by researchers. Research assistants visited each participant's classroom on 2 typical school days at approximately 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on the given day. So in total, they were observed 4 times at 10-minute observation slots. So they were observed twice during each day, and there were 2 days, so 4 slots. And the research assistant, when they arrived, they documented whether the child was wearing his or her hearing aids. And the majority of the children were observed 2 times in the same week. So 28 of the 38 children participating in the study were observed within 1 week, and 37 out of the 38 children were observed within 2 weeks. So those 2 days fell within 2 weeks of each other. 1 child was observed within 8 weeks due to an illness, a school closing, and a family emergency. But pretty much they were all observed within the same time period. And so as a result, the students were classified into 3 different groups. So if they were not wearing their hearing aids at all during those 4 observations, they were considered non-users. If they were wearing their hearing aids some of the time, but not all of the time, so 1 to 3 times when they were being seen, they were considered variable users. And if they were being observed, when they were observed, if they were wearing their hearing aids all 4 times, they were considered consistent users. So the results of this study show that 65.8% of the students, so the majority, were consistent users, and that only 9 children, or 23.7%, were not wearing their hearing aids at all, so they were non-users. As you can see in this pie chart on the right, it breaks it down for you. So some other interesting things that came as a result of this study was that gender had no effect on whether or not a student was more or less likely to wear their hearing aids. And so that was just interesting to note. Also, as a result of this study, the main things that we were able to take away based on what was able to be observed was how degree of hearing loss and grade level affected the participants. So we will see that in the next graph about how that breaks down a little bit further. The other part of the study was parent observation, and so the results from that was that in grades 1 through 4, parents accurately reported use and non-use 95% of the time, as opposed to in grades 5 through 7, parents only accurately reported use and non-use 63% of the time. So as children aged, their parents were less aware of how often their children were wearing hearing aids. So in conclusion about this study, It was found that hearing aid use in the classroom is influenced by degree of hearing loss and grade level, with children in later grades and those having milder hearing loss being at risk for inconsistent hearing aid use. And so as you can see on this graph on the side, which goes by grade, children who were in elementary school, so 1st through 4th grade, are pretty consistent users. There was two children in all 4 of those grades that were non-users, as opposed to the middle school grades, so 5th through 7th, where in 6th grade it was equally consistent users and non-users. So that's quite a drastic shift, showing that students, as they enter middle school, are less likely to wear their hearing aids. And this, as a result, stressed the importance of counseling to families and teachers who are interacting with students in this particular vulnerable situation, so older and have more mild hearing loss, which was also less likely to wear hearing aids, potentially because they felt like they didn't need them as much or they didn't notice as much of a difference. So in stressing this risk factor to parents and teachers so that they're able to accommodate for children and encourage hearing aid usage in whatever way is possible to eliminate these factors. And a lot of further research is needed to understand the reasoning better. We understand what puts children at vulnerability for not wearing hearing aids, but now is why are they not doing it. So a little bit about the strengths and weakness of this study. The strengths was that it was able to compare observation with parent perception, which does provide a valuable set of data to be able to connect a disconnect that had been happening of if parents aren't even understanding the problem that their children aren't wearing their hearing aids, then the solution cannot be arrived at. This also required objective observation for researchers. They were just looking at whether or not the students were wearing their hearing aids or not. And so that didn't allow for any skewed data from the child participating. And it was also this study was able to cover a wide age range from 1st to 7th grade, creating that new set of data that was so needed. The weaknesses of this study were that it was short term, so they were only observed for 10-minute times, and these times were anticipated ahead of time. They knew when the researchers were coming, so that could have affected the data in that the children knew, and so they were going to wear their hearing aids or they weren't. There was also, as much as it was a strength to have objective data, not interacting with the child does not help the study understand the deeper reasonings for why children are not wearing hearing aids, so that's something that could be changed in a model for a future study to get that answer a little bit more clearly. As I mentioned earlier, a scheduling error did cause a little bit of inconsistency with the time frame of when children were observed, so that could also be modified in future studies. And the limited sample size also caused a problem. There were only 38 participants involved, and as a result of this, they started to notice some trends, but were not able to draw conclusive data due to the limited diversity and size. So they started to notice that maternal education and increased access to audiologists and visits might influence hearing aid usage, but no significant enough. The data was not significantly skewed in one way or another. So they need a bigger sample size to be able to prove this. So overall, this study was very crucial in understanding the different things that make a student vulnerable to not wearing their hearing aid, but more research could be done to understand how these factors directly affect students, what they are, and how they can go to be avoided in order to increase development and language development and usage in developing students with hearing loss by wearing their hearing aids.